Hello everyone, my name is the Storyteller, and today I will share with you some horror stories to help you fall asleep. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. But before that, write down in the comments where you are listening this and what time it is. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss upcoming horror stories. Blood always told the truth. It never lied, never pretended, never forgot. Dexter Morgan had learned that early, long before the world knew him as the quiet, calm forensic analyst at the Metro Police Department. To his coworkers, he was meticulous, maybe a little strange, but harmless. At night, though, Dexter's world was painted crimson. He followed a code not written in law but etched in blood, Harry's Code. His late father, a cop himself, had seen the darkness in Dexter early and taught him a way to use it. If you have to kill, Harry had told him, make sure they deserve it. That night, Dexter sat in his car under the flickering lights of an empty parking lot, watching a man named Travis Hall, a corrupt defense attorney who had ruined lives for money. Dexter's gloved hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. His tools waited neatly in the trunk: knives, tape, and plastic sheets. The clock ticked past midnight. Travis stumbled out of a bar, reeking of whiskey and arrogance, unaware that his sins were about to come due. Dexter worked in silence, every motion rehearsed to perfection. The sound of plastic rustling was his symphony, the gleam of a scalpel his light. Travis woke up bound tightly to a steel table, his mouth covered with tape, eyes wide with terror. Dexter's calm voice filled the small room. "Do you know why you're here, Travis?" The man's muffled screams meant nothing. Dexter already knew the answer. Photos of women and children were pinned neatly to the plastic walls, victims whose lives had been shattered because of Travis's greed. He had defended murderers, freed rapists, and laughed at justice. Dexter's eyes softened with something like pity. "They deserved better than you," he whispered. Then came the familiar ritual, the confession, the cut, the release. The blade gleamed under the dim light as blood traced perfect lines across the table. When it was over, Dexter cleaned meticulously, removing every trace of what had happened. The world would never know Travis Hall was gone, only that another predator had quietly vanished. Morning sunlight spilled through Dexter's blinds as he sipped coffee and smiled faintly at his reflection. To anyone else, he was just a man preparing for work, an unassuming technician who analyzed blood for the police. But as he looked closer, he could still see the faint stain beneath his nails, invisible to others but clear to him. Blood had a way of clinging to him, of reminding him what he truly was. At the station, Detective Deborah Morgan, his sister, stormed in, waving a report. "Another missing scumbag," she said, half smirking. "Travis Hall, you know him." Dexter shrugged. "Just another ghost, I guess." But inside, his pulse quickened. Another ghost indeed. Another line crossed off his list. He smiled faintly as he turned back to his computer, the hum of fluorescent lights whispering above him. He had already found his next target, a man who wore a badge but had long ago sold his soul. Justice was coming, and Dexter Morgan would deliver it, one drop of blood at a time. Detective Anderson had sharp instincts. Too sharp, Dexter thought. The man was new to Miami Metro, transferred from New York, and he had the same kind of quiet intensity Dexter recognized in himself, the kind that watched, calculated, dissected. Anderson stood over Dexter's workstation, eyes scanning the photos of blood spatter patterns pinned neatly to the corkboard. "You ever notice how all these disappearances have one thing in common?" he asked casually. Dexter smiled, masking the chill crawling up his spine. "Enlighten me." "Every one of them was a criminal who slipped through the system." Anderson's tone was even, but his gaze lingered on Dexter too long. "Kind of poetic, don't you think?" Dexter chuckled softly, forced. "Coincidences, detective. Miami's full of them." But as Anderson walked away, Dexter could feel it, the first thread of his perfect mask beginning to unravel. That night, while he wrapped another room in plastic, Dexter's thoughts drifted. Killing had always brought him calm, a precision, a release. But now, the tension of being hunted added a new pulse to the thrill. And deep down, he realized something terrifying. He liked it. Officer Carl Benson, a name whispered in every back alley, every battered home. He wore the uniform, but he was filth underneath: extortion, beatings, bribes. He'd broken bones and lives with the same hand that swore to protect. Dexter followed him for weeks, watching, learning. The monster in Dexter's chest growled louder each day, craving justice. Finally, one humid night, Benson stumbled into the wrong alley, his last. The needle slid into his neck before he could even draw his gun. A moment later, he awoke under cold lights, plastic stretched tight around him. His badge glinted uselessly on the floor. "Do you ever wonder," Dexter asked softly, "how it feels to be on the other end of the handcuffs?" Benson screamed through the tape, thrashing, pleading. Dexter watched, calm as ever. "You used your badge as a weapon. I'm just taking it away." The knife sank cleanly. The sound of blood pattering on plastic filled the room, steady, rhythmic, like rain on a tin roof. When it was done, Dexter looked at his reflection in a shard of glass. For the first time, he saw not just justice, but satisfaction. Morning again. The city alive, indifferent. Dexter's hands, scrubbed raw from cleaning, still trembled slightly as he buttoned his shirt. At work, Anderson stood by the coffee machine, holding a file. "Another one vanished," he said. "Benson, you ever meet him?" Dexter forced a casual smirk. "Only in headlines." Anderson stared at him. "You ever get the feeling someone's cleaning up this city, like, permanently?" Dexter met his gaze, calm but aware of the razor's edge between them. "If they are," he said quietly, "maybe they're doing what the system can't." Anderson smiled faintly. "Maybe." But the look in his eyes said something else, something dangerous. He wasn't guessing anymore. That night, as Dexter drove along the coast, moonlight glinting off the waves, he saw his reflection in the windshield, a shadow of himself, smiling back. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, savior or killer, justice or monster. And somewhere behind him, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Anderson was following. The hunt had begun. It was supposed to be clean, perfect. A simple hunt, another name on the list, Raymond Cruz, a drug runner who trafficked children across the border. Dexter had followed him for days, planned every detail. But that night, something went wrong. Cruz fought harder than expected, stronger, faster. The syringe slipped. The needle snapped. Blood sprayed across Dexter's face as Cruz screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Dexter's heart pounded as he silenced him, every thud of Cruz's skull against the concrete echoing in his ears. He looked down at his gloves, ripped, bloodied. His tools scattered across the floor. The ritual was broken. The order gone. Sirens wailed in the distance. Dexter barely had time to wrap the body before vanishing through the back door. His car reeked of copper and adrenaline. For the first time in years, he felt fear, not of dying, but of being seen. He returned home trembling, scrubbing at invisible stains, whispering to himself that it was fine, that he was still in control. But deep down, he knew the truth. Dexter Morgan had made his first mistake, and someone out there had noticed. The next morning, Miami Metro was chaos. Reporters, flashing lights, detectives swarming. A fisherman had found something tangled in seaweed, Cruz's remains, half wrapped in plastic. Dexter stood among them, heart hammering, face unreadable. Anderson crouched beside the body, eyes scanning the wrapping. "Clean cuts," he muttered. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Dexter forced a laugh, or maybe he just watched too much true crime. Anderson looked up slowly. "You always have an answer, don't you, Dex?" Their eyes locked, a silent war between them. Later in the lab, Dexter stared at the blood sample under his microscope. The pattern told a story: chaos, panic, imperfection. his imperfection. He knew he should stop, lay low, but every cell in his body rejected that thought. The dark passenger inside him didn't care about danger, it wanted it. That night he drove to the beach where Cruz had been found. The waves whispered secrets only he could hear, and there in the sand he saw it, a single boot print. Not his, not Cruz's. Someone had been watching. Anderson's car was always 2 turns behind. Not close enough to be obvious, but never far enough to lose. Dexter began timing it. How long it took for those headlights to appear in his mirror, how many blocks before they vanished again. At work, Anderson grew friendlier, too friendly. He'd linger by Dexter's desk, ask him about cases, share stories over coffee. It was a game of chess now, every move calculated, every smile a feint. That evening, Dexter sat in his apartment, lights off, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. On his table lay the next file, a trafficker named Diego Morales. Another monster, another chance to restore balance. But something inside him hesitated. The code had always kept him safe. But now, with Anderson circling, the risk had become intoxicating. He whispered to himself in the dark, "If I stop, I die. If I kill again, I burn." A knock echoed through the apartment, slow, firm, familiar. "Evening, Dexter," came Anderson's voice from the other side of the door. "We need to talk." Dexter opened the door slowly. Anderson stood there, leaning casually against the frame, a faint smirk hiding something sharper. His badge caught the hallway light like a blade. "Can I come in?" Anderson asked, not waiting for an answer. He stepped inside, eyes drifting across the spotless apartment. The plastic bins stacked neatly, the immaculate counter, the faint scent of bleach. "Nice place," he said, "bit sterile." Dexter smiled politely. "I like things clean." Anderson's gaze landed on the knife block. "I bet you do." Silence stretched between them, not awkward but surgical. 2 predators circling. Anderson finally turned to him. "You ever think about right and wrong, Dexter? About what happens when the law fails?" Dexter's heartbeat slowed. His tone was steady, every day. Anderson's smirk faded. "Good. Then you'll understand when I say, I think someone's taking justice into their own hands. Someone who knows too much about blood." He stepped closer, close enough for Dexter to smell the faint trace of cigarettes on his jacket. "And I think that someone is standing right in front of me." That night, Dexter didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. His mind replayed every second of that conversation, every word, every glance. Anderson knew, or at least believed he did. The rational part of Dexter told him to flee, to disappear. But the darker part, the one that craved control, wanted something else. It wanted to end Anderson. He followed him for days, studying patterns. Anderson worked late, lived alone, kept no family photos on his desk. He was the kind of man who hunted monsters and became one in the process. On the 3rd night, Dexter found his chance. Anderson's car sat idle outside a diner, condensation on the windows. The detective ate alone, staring at a folder full of crime scene photos. His photos. Dexter approached quietly, gloves in his pocket, syringe ready. His heart pounded, breath steady. This was it, the kill that would save him. Then Anderson looked up straight at him, smiling, waiting. The trap had been set. Anderson's voice carried easily through the empty diner. "You almost had me, Dexter. You really did." Dexter froze. His hand tightened around the syringe hidden at his side. "You should be careful what you accuse people of, detective." Anderson gestured toward the booth opposite him. "Sit. If I was here to arrest you, there be a team waiting outside." Dexter sat slowly, eyes flicking to the door. "Then what do you want?" Anderson leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I want to understand. You kill killers. You're not sloppy, you're not greedy. You do what I wish I could. But you're going to get caught, and when you do, the system will call you the same thing as them. He slid a flash drive across the table. Evidence of me. I've done things too, Dexter. I've bent the rules, buried files. Maybe we're not so different. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Dexter smiled, not warmly but knowingly. Maybe we're not. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping the diner windows like a heartbeat. Two predators sat in silence, each weighing whether to strike or join forces. And neither trusted the other to blink first. Anderson kept showing up, at the station, at Dexter's lab, at the diner they both pretended not to like, always casual, always watching. Then one night, he said it plainly. I know you're the Bay Harbor butcher. Dexter didn't flinch. You can't prove it. Anderson smiled. I don't need to, I just want in. For a long time, Dexter said nothing. His code screamed no witnesses, no partners, but Anderson's eyes weren't lying. He wanted the same thing Dexter did, to punish the ones who escaped punishment. The next night, Dexter gave him a test, a rapist who walked free. Anderson followed him into the dark and didn't hesitate. The first cut was messy, unpracticed, but sincere. Dexter watched quietly. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. They became a rumor whispered in Miami's alleys, two ghosts who hunted the wicked. Anderson brought the names, Dexter brought the method. Each kill cleaner than the last. Each night, a little more of the detective disappeared, replaced by something colder. But Dexter noticed something else. Anderson started enjoying it, not the justice, the fear, the chase, the power. One night, as the blood pooled around their latest victim, Dexter saw it, the grin. The kind he'd seen on the monsters he used to hunt. Don't look at me like that, Anderson said, panting. You're the same. Not exactly, Dexter replied softly. He realized then that the thing he'd created wasn't a partner. It was a reflection, one that didn't follow a code. And reflections have a way of turning on you. Anderson started getting reckless. He didn't clean up as well. He left fibers, prints, fragments of his rage behind. Dexter covered for him at first, altered reports, misdirected evidence, but soon it was too much. The city was closing in. Detectives whispered in corners. The media called it the Red Justice killings. One night, Dexter came home to find a photo slid under his door, a crime scene. Their crime scene, marked. Anderson's handwriting was on the back. We need to talk. At the docks, Anderson was waiting, packing. His gun wasn't holstered. His eyes were wild. It's over, he said. They're getting too close. We need one last cleanup. Dexter stared at him. Who? Anderson smiled, slow and hollow. You. The wind off the water was cold. The hunt had turned inward. The night was thick with salt and rain. Dexter could hear the click of Anderson's safety releasing, steady, deliberate. You taught me everything, Anderson said, circling like a wolf. How to hide, how to plan, but you never trusted me. Dexter's voice was calm, too calm, because you never followed the code. The code is just fear, Dexter. You're afraid to admit what you are. Anderson stepped closer. His eyes flickered with something worse than madness, admiration. You're the only one who gets it, he whispered. Dexter smiled faintly. And that's why you won't pull the trigger. Lightning flashed. Anderson hesitated just long enough. The needle sank into his neck. Anderson's breath caught, his body seizing as the tranquilizer hit. Dexter whispered, lesson over. The plastic rustled under the dim light. Anderson's body was bound tight, wrists taped, chest rising shallowly. Dexter moved methodically, gloves, scalpel, recorder. His ritual was precise, almost sacred. He looked down at the man who had once called him brother. You broke the one rule, Dexter said quietly. You killed for pleasure. Anderson's laughter came through blood and broken teeth. And you kill for what, huh? Justice. Don't kid yourself. You love it too. Dexter paused. The The words burned because they were true. He leaned closer, his voice almost tender. Maybe, but I still choose who deserves it. The blade gleamed once, then fell. When the sound stopped, only the hum of the lights remained, and the faint, wet rhythm of a man cleaning his conscience. Morning came cold and blue. The city woke to headlines about a missing detective. No body, no clues. Dexter sipped his coffee in his lab, hands steady, face unreadable. Inside, the echo of Anderson's words wouldn't fade. You love it too. He'd buried Anderson deep, far below where anyone would ever dig, but the guilt floated above him, always visible in reflections. That night, he drove past the same bar where he used to find his prey. A woman laughed inside, careless and alive. For a moment, Dexter thought of walking in, sitting at the counter, pretending to be normal. But he didn't. He drove on into the dark, a ghost among the living, bound by his code and haunted by the one man who had truly seen him. It started with a headline. Body found in abandoned lot, eyes removed, body wrapped in plastic. Dexter stared at the photo. The tape pattern, the incision angles, identical to his own work. Someone was copying him. At first, it intrigued him. The precision, the discipline. But then he noticed the difference. The victims weren't killers. They were innocent. He studied the crime scene photos late into the night, tracing invisible threads between the cuts. Whoever it was, they knew his methods too well, too intimately. Then he found it, a calling card left behind, a blood-red D carved into the concrete. His letter, his mark. Someone was sending a message. Dexter began to feel eyes on him in alleys, through reflections, in the hum of his lab's fluorescent lights. Files disappeared from evidence lockers. Case reports changed dates. Someone was inside his world, walking through his steps, breathing his habits. At night, calls came through static. A distorted voice whispered through the receiver. Do you still feel clean, Dexter? He said nothing. I'm doing your work now, the voice continued, finishing what you started. Dexter's grip tightened on the phone. You're not me. The voice laughed softly. Then why does it feel so familiar? The line went dead. In that silence, Dexter realized this wasn't a random copycat. This was personal. The next scene was worse. A man found hanging in a freezer, body drained, plastic-lined floor beneath him. The forensics team swarmed the area, but Dexter stood motionless, staring at the signature on the wall written in dried blood. Clean hands leave dirty shadows. He recognized the handwriting. Anderson. But Anderson was dead. He'd buried him himself. He drove back to the site that night, shovel in hand, rain pouring hard enough to blur his thoughts. He dug where Anderson's body should have been. The hole was empty. And in that moment, beneath the roaring storm, Dexter felt something he hadn't in years. Fear. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. The sky seemed to mourn with him as he stared down at the gaping hole where Anderson's body once lay. The mud clung to his boots, cold and heavy. His gloves were slick with rainwater and something darker. He crouched and examined the dirt. It wasn't disturbed recently, no fresh prints, no new tools. Whoever had taken the body had done it weeks ago, maybe months. But there, half buried in the mud, was something small, a button from a lab coat. His lab coat. He stared at it for a long time, unable to tell if it had been planted or if, somehow, it meant something worse, that he'd done this himself. The idea lingered like rot in his head as thunder rolled above. That night back at his apartment, he tore the place apart. Files, notes, records, every trace of his ritual, searching for signs of intrusion. But everything was exactly where it should be. Except for one thing. The photograph. On his wall was a photo of his very first victim, a man who had escaped conviction for killing a child. The photo was missing. In its place was a new one, a photo of Dexter. Sleep became impossible. Every reflection seemed to move when he didn't. At the lab, his coworkers started to whisper. He saw the way they looked at him like maybe they knew something. Maybe they'd seen what he kept hidden beneath that calm, analytical mask. Late one night, while reviewing DNA reports, he noticed an anomaly in a blood sample from the last crime scene. The match returned only one result. Dexter Morgan. His pulse slowed, then quickened again. His mind rejected it, fought against the data, contamination, error, manipulation. It had to be. He leaned closer to the monitor, eyes flicking over the results again and again. But no, it wasn't wrong. It was him. Someone had planted his blood at the scene. But who could get that close? The reflection in the computer screen flickered, and for a brief second he saw himself smiling. Only it wasn't him. The smile was too wide, too knowing. That night the noise started, scraping, faint but constant, somewhere inside the walls of his apartment. He followed the sound with a flashlight, heart pounding. The beam quivered as he listened. It stopped whenever he got close, then started again behind him. He tore open the plaster with a crowbar, dust spilling like ash. Inside the wall cavity was a small recorder, still playing a looped sound, his own voice. "Do you still feel clean, Dexter?" He froze. Underneath the recorder was something else, a piece of skin, pale and leathery, pinned with surgical precision. Carved into it were the words, "You taught me everything." He staggered back, every nerve in his body screaming. He trained no one, shared nothing. His ritual was sacred, solitary. But then memory started bleeding through, half-forgotten nights, faces blurred by alcohol and blood, whispers of a protege. Someone had been there once, watching, learning. And now they were coming home. The first time Dexter saw the letter, it came folded neatly in his mailbox. No return address, no smudges, just a crisp white envelope sealed with a single fingerprint in blood. Inside, one line, "I'm ready for my final lesson." He read it over and over, the words digging into his thoughts like glass shards. The handwriting was familiar, too precise, too clean, like his old case notes, only slightly tilted, almost mocking. He remembered flashes. A young man interning at the department years ago, quiet, observant, too intelligent for his age. Ethan Cole. Dexter had seen potential in him. Curiosity, the kind that could become dangerous if left unchecked. He thought he'd scared the boy off when he caught him snooping around evidence from one of his private projects. Apparently he hadn't. That night Dexter cleaned his knives, slowly, carefully, because if Ethan wanted a lesson, he'd get one. He started tracking Ethan like any other target, only this time the rules had changed. Everywhere Dexter went, Ethan was one step ahead. The bars where Dexter scouted, the alleys he'd used for disposal, all of them were watched. Every move mirrored, every trick countered. The hunter had become prey. Then one night, while tailing what he thought was Ethan's hideout, Dexter found something waiting for him. Plastic sheets hung from the ceiling, glistening under a single flickering light. A table stood in the center, surgical tools lined perfectly in a row. And in the middle, a camera. He pressed play. The video showed Ethan sitting calmly in a chair, his face painted with dried blood. "Hello, Dexter," he said softly. "You taught me precision, control, but you forgot to teach me fear." Ethan leaned forward. "You see, I don't choose the guilty. I choose the ones who think they're clean." Then he smiled. "So tell me, how clean are you really?" The feed cut to static. Dexter sat alone in his apartment, the light from the screen washing his face in cold blue. He could feel it now, the unraveling. He'd created Ethan, not just trained him, shaped him, molded him into something far worse. And somewhere deep down, a part of him was proud. He poured himself a drink, but his hands shook too much to lift it. There was another envelope on the table. He didn't remember how it got there. Inside, a flash drive. He plugged it in. A series of photos appeared, every victim Dexter had ever taken. Only these weren't his photographs. They were Ethan. Each scene recreated perfectly, down to the smallest cut, the placement of the blade, except for one difference. In every photo, behind the body stood Dexter, watching. He slammed the laptop shut, his breath quickening. If Ethan could get that close, he was already inside. Somewhere in the dark of the room, something creaked. Lesson 2, a voice whispered from the shadows. Admit who you really are. Dexter moved through the abandoned warehouse, every step measured, every breath shallow. The stench of rusted metal and decay clung to him. Ethan was waiting. He didn't hide. He leaned against a beam, arms crossed, smiling like a child showing off a new toy. You finally came, he said softly. I wondered how long you'd take. Dexter's voice was steady. I warned you, Ethan. I don't make mistakes twice. Ethan tilted his head. Neither do I, and tonight I get to teach you a lesson, the final one. Dexter's gaze swept the warehouse. Plastic sheets hung from the ceiling. Knives lined tables. Cameras were everywhere. Every angle recorded, every corner observed. The realization hit Dexter like ice. This was no trap he could control. He was inside Ethan's web. And Ethan knew it. The fight began silently. Knife against knife, foot against foot. Shadows danced across the walls, twisted by flickering fluorescent lights. Dexter felt the familiar surge, adrenaline, focus, calm. This was what he lived for. Ethan moved with uncanny precision, anticipating every strike. You taught me how to hunt, he whispered. Now I hunt you. Dexter slashed, parried, kicked, and spun. Blood spattered the floor, yet neither gave ground. Every wound inflicted was measured, deliberate, a conversation of blades. And in the midst of chaos, Dexter realized the truth. Ethan had become more than a protege. He was Dexter perfected, unafraid, unrestrained, unstoppable. A knife caught Dexter's shoulder, cutting deep. Pain flared, but he held his stance. The student had surpassed the master. Breathing heavily, Dexter stumbled to the nearest wall, watching Ethan approach with calm inevitability. You were my mirror, Ethan said, blood glinting on his hands. I learned from you, but now the lesson ends. Dexter's mind raced. Escape was impossible. Every exit was blocked. Every shadow held a blade. Then in a moment of clarity, he smiled faintly. You're wrong, he whispered. The lesson never ends, not for either of us. Ethan hesitated. Dexter lunged forward with one final desperate strike. Chaos erupted. Screams, knives, blood, all mixed into a symphony of violence. Hours later, Dexter sat alone in the wreckage, panting, covered in blood, watching Ethan's body crumpled in the shadows. Or was it a reflection? He looked at the shattered mirror across the room. His own face stared back, tired, wounded, human, and yet still smiling. Somewhere inside, the dark passenger stirred, whispering, "The hunt never ends." Outside, the city slept, and Dexter, the hunter and the hunted, disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but shadows and a trail of blood. The sun was bleeding behind the jagged horizon as 5 teenagers piled into the rusted old SUV, its engine coughing as if protesting the journey ahead. Hollow Creek Forest loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette stretching like a jagged scar across the landscape. The town whispered warnings about the forest, stories of disappearances, of shadows moving where no one should be, of screams muffled by the trees. But Emily, holding a flashlight in one hand and a map in the other, waved them off. It's just the woods, she said, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. We'll be fine. Besides, we're not kids anymore. We can handle a little adventure. Marcus, sitting rigidly in the passenger seat, chewed on his fingernails. It's dark out there. I mean, it's really dark. And those stories, what if? Emily's voice cut through the tension. "Stop it. Stop thinking about what might happen. We stick together and nothing will happen." But as the SUV's headlights pierced the forest's edge, even she felt a shiver. The trees were impossibly tall, their blackened branches curling in ways that seemed almost deliberate, as if the forest itself were alive, watching, waiting. By the time they reached the narrow dirt trail winding into the forest, the last remnants of sunlight had vanished, leaving them in an oppressive twilight that pressed against their skin. The air was thick with the smell of damp pine needles, moss, and something faintly metallic, like blood. The forest floor was uneven, littered with tangled roots and fallen branches that snapped under their feet, echoing unnaturally through the stillness. Emily led the way with her flashlight, each beam slicing through the darkness but barely illuminating more than a few feet ahead. Every shadow seemed to twitch, move just outside the circle of light. Marcus kept glancing over his shoulder, convinced he saw something lurking just beyond the trees. "Emily, I think someone there." "Shut up," she hissed, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's just your imagination. Focus on walking." But even as she spoke, Emily's stomach churned. Something followed them. She could feel it in the weight of the silence, in the way the air shifted and grew heavier with each step. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, something patient, waiting for the moment they let their guard down. Hours or maybe minutes, time seemed meaningless here. Later, they stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight cast an eerie glow across a cabin half swallowed by creeping vines and decay. Its windows were dark pits, hollow and accusing. The roof sagged as though weighed down by centuries of rot. A sense of wrongness pressed down on them, heavier than the night air. This place looks abandoned," Sarah whispered, stepping back instinctively. Her flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the cabin's weathered wood. "Abandoned doesn't mean safe," Jason said, his usual bravado slipping into a nervous edge. "Look at it. Something doesn't feel right." But curiosity, as always, overcame caution. Emily pushed the door open. The hinges shrieked like tortured metal and the floorboards groaned under their weight. The moment they stepped inside, a sudden, sharp snap echoed behind them. The door slammed shut with a bone-chilling thud, locked. No one had touched it. The air inside was thick and fetid, smelling of mold, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that turned their stomachs. Shadows seemed to cling to the walls, twisting and writhing as if alive. Emily tried the windows nailed shut, dust streaked, impossible to break. Panic surged in the group, but it wasn't the fear of being trapped that terrified them most. It was the sense that they weren't alone. Something was in the cabin with them, watching, moving just out of the corner of their eyes. And somewhere deep in the forest, the trees whispered. Hours passed in suffocating silence. The teenagers huddled together, their breath shallow, hearts hammering in unison. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the rotting walls made them flinch. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching like dark, living fingers, and the metallic sweet smell of decay grew stronger, almost suffocating. Marcus tried to stay brave. "It's just an old cabin," he whispered. "Maybe someone left it like this decades ago." Emily's jaw tightened. No one leaves a place like this by accident. Her flashlight quivered in her hand, catching movement out of the corner of her eye. Something shifted in the shadows. A soft scraping sound came from the attic above them. It was slow, deliberate, like claws dragging across wood. They froze. "Who's there?" Emily called, voice shaking despite her effort to remain calm. Silence answered. Then a whisper, low, guttural, unintelligible, but unmistakably human. The cabin seemed to close in on them. Walls groaned, the floorboards warped beneath their feet, and the shadows thickened. The teenagers realized with growing horror that they were no longer alone. Suddenly, ropes shot from the darkness, coiling around their wrists and ankles like living snakes. Panic erupted. Sarah screamed as she was yanked toward the wall. Jason struggled, kicking, but the ropes were impossibly strong. Their hands scraped against splintered wood, skin tearing, yet they could not break free. A figure emerged from the corner, tall, hulking, and impossibly thin. Its face was obscured by a mask made of bark, moss, and bone, eyes black voids that seemed to pierce their souls. It moved with a predatory calm, circling the trapped teens like a lion inspecting injured prey. Emily tried to reason. "We don't want trouble, please just let us go." The figure tilted its head and made no sound, only a slow, deliberate step toward Marcus. His screams echoed through the cabin as the figure dragged him into the shadows. The remaining four struggled, thrashing against their bonds, but the ropes only tightened. Panic clawed at them like a living thing, and the metallic sweet stench filled their lungs, nauseating them. They were utterly helpless. And outside, the forest waited. When the figure returned, it carried Marcus slumped over its shoulder, blood trickling from a deep cut on his arm. He whimpered, half-conscious, and the sight shattered the remaining teens' resolve. Fear became a tangible weight pressing against their chests. The figure placed Marcus back in the circle, kneeling to inspect him. Its hands were surprisingly delicate, almost careful, despite the grotesque mask and unnatural strength. It examined each teen's belongings, a bracelet, a notebook, a cell phone, spreading them across the floor like a twisted ritual. "It's studying us," whispered Sarah, tears streaking her dirty face. Emily realized the horrifying truth. It had been watching them, learning their habits, understanding their fears. Every whispered story, every glance, every heartbeat had been cataloged. The figure stood again and circled them, its movements deliberate and methodical. The teens' stomachs churned as it paused before each one, breathing shallow and hot, a predator savoring the terror it had created. Emily's mind raced. There had to be a way out. But the deeper the figure's black void eyes bored into her, the more she understood. Escape would not be simple, and the forest had already claimed them. Hours blurred into a twisted night as the figure toyed with them. Emily's fingers ached raw from struggling against the ropes, and Marcus moaned softly, blood drying along his arm. The creature moved silently, its presence filling every corner of the cabin. Each creak of the floorboard made their hearts jump. Then it began to whisper, not words, not in any language they could understand, but low, guttural sounds that vibrated through their bones. The sound seemed to trigger something primal in them, panic rising like a tide. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, while Jason's jaw clenched in defiance, even though fear paralyzed his legs. Emily's mind raced. The figure had patterns. It watched their eyes, listened to their breathing, seemed to anticipate every twitch, every instinctive movement. Escape would not be simple. It wanted them to unravel inside the cabin before it even considered touching the forest again. From above, the attic groaned. A shadow moved along the beams, slow, deliberate. The figure's head tilted as if listening. Then, without warning, it vanished into the ceiling, leaving the teens gasping, trembling, unsure if it had really left or was simply preparing to strike from above. Minutes, maybe hours, passed. Time had no meaning here. Their lungs burned, eyes stinging from tears, and the ropes bit into their skin. Suddenly, the creature reappeared, dragging something from the darkness. It was Marcus, barely conscious, blood seeping through his torn sleeve, eyes wide with terror. It threw him to the floor with a sickening thud, his head snapping back. Emily screamed, but the figure raised a hand, silencing her instantly, or so it seemed. Its mask glimmered faintly in the flashlight beams, a grotesque mockery of a human face, lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile. Then it began to circle the group again, moving slowly, rhythmically, like a predator savoring the fear. Every step echoed on the cabin floorboards, reverberating in their bones. Its gaze locked on Emily. She realized with a cold certainty that it wasn't just hunting them physically. It was hunting their minds, preying on their terror, twisting them against one another. Jason spat blood from a split lip and whispered, "We have to fight together." But Emily knew the truth. The moment they panicked or disobeyed, the figure would exploit it, and one by one it would take them. The attic groaned again, louder this time. Something heavy moved above their heads, dragging, scraping, testing the boards. The teens froze, eyes wide, hearts thundering. Then the figure's voice emerged, a rasping, guttural tone that seemed to pierce through their very skulls. "You shouldn't be here," it said, low and deliberate. "The woods don't forgive. The cabin doesn't forgive. You don't deserve to leave." Emily's mind screamed for a plan, any plan. She tugged at her ropes, her fingers raw and bleeding. Sarah whimpered beside her, whispering, "Please, please." And then, without warning, the figure leapt from the ceiling, landing silently behind Jason. Its hands were iron, squeezing his shoulders until he cried out, barely able to breathe. Panic surged like fire through the remaining teens. They realized that the cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a trap, a cage. And outside, the forest waited, hungering for the sound of their screams. Emily's thoughts snapped into clarity. They had to move to escape, or at least to survive long enough to find a weapon. But as she glanced around, every shadow seemed to throb, to pulse like a living thing. There was no safe corner, no refuge. And the creature was patient. It would wait, watching until they broke, until it had all of them. Emily's heart hammered as she scanned the cabin, desperate for anything that could help them. Broken chair legs, splintered planks, even shards of glass, anything. The figure crouched in the corner, silent, waiting, as if aware of every flicker of fear running through their bodies. Marcus groaned from the floor, his hand clutching the blood seeping from his arm. Sarah whimpered, head pressed to the dusty boards, while Jason's eyes burned with a mix of rage and panic. The ropes cut deeper with every movement, but there was no time to think of pain, only survival. Suddenly, the figure lunged at Jason, fast and precise, but Emily managed to kick a chair at it. The object shattered, scattering splinters across the floor. The figure recoiled slightly, just enough for the teens to sense a glimmer of hope. They could fight back, barely. Breathing heavily, Emily whispered a plan. "We split. 2 go for the back window, 2 for the front. Marcus, you distract it." Marcus shook his head weakly, his voice hoarse. I can't." The figure moved again, slow and deliberate, its mask glinting in the weak flashlight beams. Each step seemed measured, calculated, as if it were reading their minds. Panic clawed at Emily's chest, but she forced herself to focus. She glanced at Sarah. "We can't wait. We have to do it now or we're done." With a sudden surge of desperation, Emily and Jason lunged for the front, dragging broken furniture as shields. The creature's hands shot out, grabbing nothing but air as they tumbled past. Behind them, Marcus and Sarah scrambled toward the back, the ropes cutting, shredding skin, but they refused to stop. The cabin erupted into chaos. Splinters flew, ropes snapped, and the figure's guttural growls filled the air. It moved with unnatural speed, slamming into the floorboards, smashing the air where the teens had been seconds before. The metallic sweet smell of decay thickened, suffocating, and the shadows themselves seemed to pulse, extending tendrils along the walls. Emily's fingers found a jagged shard of glass, and she swung at the figure as it lunged. The shard scraped against its moss and bark mask, leaving a shallow cut, a cry from the beast echoing through the cabin. For a fleeting second, it recoiled human, almost before regaining its terrifying composure. The teens knew they couldn't stay together. Survival meant risking separation. With a nod to Jason, Emily bolted for the front door. The figure's eyes, dark voids beneath its mask, tracked her every move, but she ran, adrenaline surging into the thick night of the forest, unsure if she would ever see another sunrise. The forest swallowed them instantly. Emily's flashlight cut through the blackness, but shadows seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. Branches clawed at her arms and face, thorns tearing clothing. Scraping skin, every step crunched on dry leaves, a noisy beacon for the thing that pursued them. Jason stumbled beside her, gasping, blood smeared across his palms from the floorboard cuts. "We can't keep running, it's faster than us," he panted. Emily's chest burned, lungs screaming, but she refused to stop. Behind them, a guttural, inhuman howl erupted, echoing through the trees, followed by the crunch of massive feet. The creature had emerged from the cabin, relentless, hunting them with precision. Branches whipped their faces as they veered off the trail, hopping to lose it in the dense thickets. But the forest seemed alive, turning against them, guiding the predator's path. Sarah tripped over a hidden root, crashing to the ground. Emily skidded to a halt, grabbing her arm, heart pounding. "Come on, get up." The creature's shadow appeared between the trees. Its mask gleamed in the moonlight. It didn't run, it didn't need to. Its steps were deliberate, each one a calculated threat. The wind carried its scent, sweet and metallic, and Emily gagged. Marcus, struggling to stay upright, screamed as the ropes tore into his wrists, but there was no time to stop. The figure circled the clearing, eyes locked on the ones who had slowed. It seemed to play with them, forcing them to panic. Jason grabbed a fallen branch, trying to swing at the creature as it lunged. The blow grazed it, but it only hissed, a sound that pierced Emily's eardrums, and lunged again. Survival wasn't about strength. It was about staying just ahead of death itself. They stumbled into a small ravine. Hopping the uneven terrain would slow their hunter. Emily's foot caught, and she tumbled, scraping her knees across jagged rocks. Panic flared as the creature's shadow moved across the top of the ravine, silent but terrifyingly close. "Keep moving," she screamed, pulling herself up. They scrambled, clinging to roots and rocks, hearts hammering so violently it felt like the forest itself would hear them. Then the creature's roar echoed again, impossibly loud, shaking the trees. The ground trembled beneath them and branches snapped, falling dangerously close. Emily realized with a growing dread that the forest wasn't just a hiding place. It was a trap, amplifying their fear, guiding the predator, and feeding on their panic. They could run, but the creature always knew where they were. Escape wasn't just a goal. It was a battle for every breath, every heartbeat. And in the darkness, Emily understood the truth. Only one or two might survive if they were lucky, if they were clever, if the forest decided to let them. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees pressing like silent sentinels. Each step forward was agony, gnarled roots snagging their shoes, brambles slicing at their arms, and shadows twisting unnaturally in every direction. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting jagged beams that barely illuminated the path ahead. She could hear her own heart thumping, Marcus groaning behind her, Sarah whimpering, and Jason cursing under his breath. Every sound was amplified. A twig snapping underfoot sounded like a rifle shot, leaves rustling like whispers of something moving just beyond vision. And then they heard it, soft, deliberate footfalls, crunching the forest floor, slow but methodical, always keeping pace. They froze, eyes wide. The creature emerged from the shadows with unnatural ease, towering over them. Its mask glimmered under the pale moonlight, moss and bark blending seamlessly with the forest. It didn't run. It didn't chase. It stalked. Each step was measured, every movement deliberate, forcing them to break into panic sprints that only played into its hands. Emily stumbled, scraping her knees. She could feel the predator's gaze burning into her back, its presence a weight in the air. Panic clawed at her throat as the forest seemed to shift, trees stretching, roots forming barriers, the underbrush entangling their feet. Escape required strategy, speed, and an unthinkable courage. They veered off the narrow trail, plunging into denser thickets where the moonlight barely reached. Emily's lungs burned as she pulled herself through tangles of branches. Marcus tripped, screaming as his wrist tore on a hidden root, but Emily yanked him upright. "Move! Don't look back!" she shouted. Behind them, the creature's guttural growls rolled through the trees, echoing and twisting in impossible ways. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a weapon, a psychic hammer that rattled their nerves, amplified fear in every cell, and made their muscles tremble uncontrollably. Sarah sobbed, stumbling into a shallow ditch, her small frame shaking uncontrollably. Jason swung a branch like a club, lashing at shadows that weren't really there, striking nothing but air. The forest seemed alive, guiding the predator to them, funneling them into a trap where every choice narrowed. Emily's mind raced, calculating paths, counting steps, trying to stay ahead of instinct and terror. The creature appeared suddenly, towering over them with terrifying stillness. Its eyes, black voids behind the mask, scanned each teen as if measuring their fear, deciding which one to strike first. It lunged, and Emily dived sideways, scraping her arm along jagged bark. Marcus screamed as the creature's hand brushed his shoulder, pulling him just out of her reach. The hunt had become lethal, and the forest itself had become an accomplice. They ran blindly, lungs burning, feet slamming into roots and rocks, branches clawing at their faces. Emily's flashlight finally died, leaving them in near-total darkness. Panic surged like a living thing. Marcus's groans grew weaker, Sarah's sobs shriller, Jason's curses frantic. Then came the roar, louder, closer, shaking the trees and rattling their teeth. The predator's form emerged from the shadows, larger than they remembered, every movement precise, controlled, predatory. It didn't chase in a straight line. It anticipated, predicting every evasive maneuver, cutting off escape routes with terrifying intelligence. The forest warped around them. Hollow logs and thickets that had seemed passable moments ago became walls. Roots erupted from the ground, tripping them, forcing them. Closer together, Emily realized the forest itself was hunting them, guiding the creature, feeding on their terror. Her mind screamed for a plan, but rational thought collided with the raw instinct to survive. They could hear their own hearts pounding, hear Marcus coughing weakly, Sarah crying, Jason muttering prayers under his breath. The predator circled them, every step a promise of pain, every movement a calculation to break their will. And in the darkness, Emily understood a horrifying truth. They were not just being chased. They were being predicted, measured, hunted with terrifying patience. Escape was not a matter of speed. It was a matter of wits and luck. Night pressed down like a living weight. The trees loomed overhead, blackened and grotesque, their branches writhing like skeletal fingers. Every breath Emily took was sharp, cold, and metallic with fear. She could barely see her friends, Marcus limping behind her, blood dripping from his scraped wrists, Sarah trailing in a trembling heap, Jason panting and muttering curses. The predator didn't rush. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough to suffocate them. Every step they took was anticipated. Roots and underbrush seemed to rise, tripping them, forcing them toward the center of the forest where the shadows were thickest. A sudden snapping sound froze them all. A branch broke under invisible weight. Then another. Emily's heart stopped as a guttural roar echoed from above. The figure had climbed a tree silently, looming in the canopy like a nightmare made real. Its black void eyes gleamed beneath the mask, tracking their every movement. Emily tried to calm herself, her mind racing for any possible escape. She realized with horror that the forest itself was part of the predator. Paths shifted, clearings disappeared, shadows deepened to swallow them whole. The trees were no longer passive observers. They were extensions of the creature, bending reality to trap the terrified teens. Suddenly, Marcus stumbled, falling to his knees as his wrist caught on a hidden root. Emily skidded to grab him, but the predator was already closer, silent and horrifyingly fast. Its breath was metallic, sweet, almost intoxicating. He tried to scream, but the sound was cut short as the creature's hand closed around his shoulder, dragging him backward into the shadows. Sarah shrieked and Jason swung a branch wildly, barely grazing the figure. It didn't flinch. It only tilted its head and let out a low, resonating growl that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Panic surged like a tidal wave, freezing Emily for a moment before she shoved Jason forward. "Run!" she screamed. Branches whipped at their faces, roots snagged their feet, and leaves scraped their skin raw. The predator circled them, testing their endurance, measuring their fear. Every wrong step was fatal. Every stumble could mean death. They sprinted blindly, but the forest seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to wear them down physically and mentally. Emily realized they weren't just being hunted, they were being studied, dissected, each scream and sob cataloged, each panic-stricken movement feeding the predator's growing hunger. Survival wasn't just about running. It was about outthinking something that already knew them better than they knew themselves. They stumbled into a clearing, faint moonlight casting their shadows long and grotesque. Emily's chest heaved, every breath tearing at her lungs. Marcus lay crumpled behind a tree, unconscious, blood seeping from his wounds. Sarah clutched at Emily's arm, trembling uncontrollably. Jason held a broken branch like a weapon, though they all knew it wouldn't stop the creature. From the darkness, a low, resonating hiss emerged. The predator stepped into the moonlight, mask glinting, limbs unnaturally long and thin, moving with the silence of death incarnate. It tilted its head, observing, calculating. The clearing itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own, roots writhing and snapping at their feet. Emily's mind raced. They couldn't outrun it forever, but she saw something, a fallen tree forming a crude bridge over a ravine. Risking everything, she grabbed Jason's arm and whispered, "We jump. Now, don't think, just jump." The predator hissed in response, moving faster than they could comprehend. They ran, hearts hammering, lungs burning, leaping over jagged rocks, branches slashing at their skin. Emily's last thought before hitting the other side was a flicker of hope, maybe, just maybe, they could survive. But the forest had other plans, and the predator was patient. Emily's legs screamed with exhaustion, every muscle trembling as she scrambled over jagged rocks and twisted roots. Jason clung to her side, blood streaked across his face from countless scratches, his grip on the broken branch weak. Behind them, the predator moved with eerie, silent grace, its footsteps nearly inaudible over the crunch of leaves and snapping twigs. The forest itself seemed to close in, every shadow thickening, every tree leaning unnaturally toward them. The wind carried whispers, soft but unmistakable, a chorus of the predator's making. Emily's mind screamed at her to keep moving, but panic clawed at her, threatening to freeze her in place. She forced her legs to keep going, the broken branch in Jason's hand swaying uselessly as a symbol of false defense. Marcus groaned, half-conscious, pinned by a fallen branch he hadn't been able to lift. Sarah whimpered behind him, her small frame shivering violently. Emily grabbed her hand and yanked her forward, ignoring the cuts that stung across her palms. Each step was agony, each breath a battle. Above them, shadows shifted in impossible ways. The predator was everywhere at once, or so it seemed. It didn't just chase, it manipulated. Paths twisted, roots appeared where there had been none, and branches lashed at their faces with uncanny timing. Every instinct screamed that survival depended on their ability to think faster than the impossible, relentless hunter. The clearing they stumbled into offered no relief. Moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and the ground was littered with jagged roots and broken branches. Emily crouched behind a fallen log, clutching Sarah's hand tightly, trying to calm her racing heart. Jason's eyes were wide, scanning for anything to use as a weapon, but the reality was grim. Nothing in this forest could match the predator. Then it appeared, stepping into the clearing with slow, deliberate movements. The mask glinted faintly, moss and bark blending with its unnaturally long limbs. It tilted its head, and the faintest hiss rolled from it, a sound that seemed to seep into Emily's bones. Fear was a living entity here, and it thrived on their desperation. Emily realized something horrifying. The predator wasn't just stalking them. It was learning from them, anticipating their moves, predicting panic. Every frantic decision, every stumble, every glance over the shoulder fed it. Marcus groaned behind a tree, bleeding heavily, and Emily knew he wouldn't survive much longer. They couldn't fight. They couldn't hide. All they could do was run and hope the forest didn't betray them entirely. But the predator had already planned the next move, and Emily understood the cruel reality. It wasn't enough to survive. They had to outsmart something that didn't think like them. Branches whipped at their faces as they dashed downhill, mud sucking at their shoes. Marcus tripped again, crashing to the ground with a painful grunt, and Sarah's scream cut through the night. Jason lunged back to grab Marcus, but the predator was already there, its black void eyes fixed on the fallen teen. Emily froze, heart hammering, as the creature extended a grotesque hand toward Marcus. A guttural growl filled the clearing, vibrating in her chest, and she realized the predator wasn't just hunting their bodies, it was hunting their will to survive. Fear was its weapon, and panic was its ammunition. She grabbed a jagged branch, ready to strike, but knew instinctively it wouldn't be enough. The predator moved with a terrifying intelligence, circling them, forcing them toward the ravine that loomed ahead. Every misstep could mean death. Every hesitation could be their last. Emily's mind raced. They had to act together, think together, or the forest would swallow them, and the predator would enjoy every second of it. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she realized that survival required more than strength. It required cunning, courage, and the ability to make impossible decisions under paralyzing fear. Emily's lungs burned, her legs trembling with every step, but there was no time to rest. Behind her, the predator stalked with terrifying patience, each movement deliberate, each step measured to keep them within its reach. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them, roots curling like serpents, branches snagging clothes and hair, the uneven terrain making every stride a struggle. Marcus's groans grew weaker with each stumble. Emily grabbed his arm, yanking him forward, ignoring the fresh scrapes and blood staining her hands. Sarah's sobs were quiet but relentless, her small body pressed against Emily as if clinging to life itself. Jason held a broken branch in a death grip, swinging at shadows, hopping to create distance, but the predator wasn't fooled. It didn't attack recklessly, it waited for their panic to peak. Then the sound came, a low, resonating growl that vibrated through the ground, shaking the trees, rattling their teeth. The predator was no longer just behind them. It was everywhere at once, appearing in glimpses, shadows flickering in the corner of their eyes, disappearing when they looked directly. The forest was a maze, but the predator knew it intimately. Every decision they made, every step they took, guided them closer to its will. Emily realized with a cold certainty, they weren't just running. They were being manipulated, hunted in a game where the forest itself was an extension of the predator's mind. The ravine loomed ahead, jagged rocks and twisted roots forming a perilous obstacle. Emily's pulse thundered as she scanned for a way across. One misstep meant death, and the predator's presence loomed just beyond, silent but palpable, watching, waiting. Marcus struggled beside her, sweat and blood mixing on his pale skin, and Sarah clutched Emily's arm, eyes wide with terror. Jason hissed under his breath, "We can make it. We just have to." His words trailed off as the predator's shadow appeared on the far edge, stretching impossibly, limbs longer than they should have been, mask gleaming with a sickly light. It tilted its head, watching them like a spider observing its prey. Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "On three," she whispered. "We jump together, no hesitation." Marcus nodded weakly, Sarah squeezed Emily's hand, and Jason braced himself. 1, 2, 3. They launched themselves across the ravine. Emily felt the wind whip her face, roots scratching her arms, rocks cutting her legs. Her chest heaved as they landed hard on the other side, breathless, trembling. The predator's growl reverberated from the edge they just crossed. It hadn't moved. It had waited, patient, watching, letting them believe they were safe, and the forest had been part of its trap all along. The forest grew darker, the trees twisted into unnatural shapes, creating corridors and dead ends. Emily led the group cautiously, every rustle making them jump, every snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot. Marcus stumbled, bloodied and exhausted, while Sarah trailed silently, eyes wide, clinging to Emily as though she were the only tether keeping her alive. The predator was relentless. It emerged silently from the shadows, steps measured, eyes black voids beneath its mask, limbs bending in ways no human should be able to move. Its presence alone was an assault on the senses, the metallic sweet stench, the guttural growls, the way the darkness seemed to cling to it like a cloak. Emily realized they had no advantage. No weapon could harm it, no path could outrun it. Their survival depended entirely on cunning, on exploiting whatever fleeting mistakes it might make. She scanned the terrain, spotting a shallow stream and a rocky incline that might allow them to temporarily distance themselves. "Move," she hissed, dragging Marcus forward. Jason gritted his teeth, swinging his branch, though they both knew it was symbolic at best. The predator hissed, a sound that vibrated through the air, through their bones, and Emily understood something horrifying. It thrived on their fear, it fed on every heartbeat, every tremor of panic. They ran, the forest alive with snapping twigs and rustling leaves, the predator stalking every step, relentless, patient, unyielding. Emily's mind raced. One mistake, one misstep, and they would be claimed. She knew deep down that not all of them would make it through the night. The forest seemed endless, every direction a labyrinth of shadows, roots, and gnarled trees that threatened to trip them at every step. Emily's lungs burned, legs trembling, blood from cuts dripping down her arms. Marcus lagged behind, barely able to keep pace, his groans growing weaker. Sarah clung to Emily like a lifeline, trembling so violently that she nearly fell twice. Jason swore under his breath, swinging the broken branch at shadows that were already gone. And then it appeared, closer than they could have imagined. The predator stood at the edge of a clearing, its black void eyes scanning the teens, limbs impossibly long and sinuous, the mask glinting with a sick, unnatural light. It didn't rush forward. It didn't need to. It let them run, watched them flail, measured their fear, savoring the anticipation. Emily stumbled, skidding on wet leaves, nearly falling face first. She felt the predator's presence behind her, as if it had extended tendrils into her mind. Panic clawed at her throat. Marcus gasped, lagging behind, and Emily's heart lurched. He couldn't survive another encounter like the last. Sarah's whimpers echoed, small and pitiful in the vast, oppressive night. The predator moved with impossible speed, silently closing the distance. It lunged for Marcus. Emily screamed, throwing herself at the creature, swinging the broken branch with all her remaining strength. The predator staggered slightly, almost human in its reaction, before recovering, a low, terrifying growl shaking the clearing. They were outmatched, outsmarted, and yet survival demanded they keep moving, keep thinking, keep running. The ground opened into a rocky gorge, narrow and treacherous. Emily led the group cautiously, each step a gamble. The predator's footsteps followed like a death sentence, silent but palpable. The air was thick with the metallic scent of fear and blood, the forest alive with unseen rustlings, every shadow a potential death trap. Marcus stumbled again, falling against a jagged rock, blood seeping from fresh abrasions. Emily yanked him upright, ignoring the cuts on her hands. "Come on, we have to keep moving," she shouted. Sarah cried quietly, gripping Emily's arm, while Jason swung the branch frantically at shadows that weren't really there. The predator emerged from the darkness ahead, mask glinting, limbs bending at unnatural angles, the forest itself seeming to obey its will. Roots erupted from the ground, branches lashed like whips, the forest becoming a weapon in its hands. Emily realized with horror, this wasn't just a hunt, it was a test, a game. The predator wanted to break them entirely before the final strike. She scanned desperately for a way out. A narrow ledge along the gorge promised a chance, a slim, terrifying hope. They had no weapons, no backup, just instinct and the faint spark of courage. Emily took a deep breath and whispered, "We go together. One step at a time, don't look back." They moved along the ledge, hands gripping rocks, feet slipping on loose stones. Below, the gorge yawned like a maw ready to swallow them whole. The predator appeared above, looming impossibly large, shadows stretching across the trees, eyes locked on them with a malevolent intelligence. Marcus's foot slipped and he cried out. The predator lunged, faster than Emily could react. In a heartbeat, it grabbed him with impossibly strong hands, lifting him like a rag doll. Sarah screamed, and Emily felt a surge of rage-fueled strength as she hurled herself at the creature, clawing at its mask, striking at anything to distract it. Jason shoved Emily aside, swinging his branch desperately. For a moment, the predator faltered, almost human in its reaction, and Emily saw the opening. She grabbed Sarah and bolted along the ledge, feet slipping, hearts hammering, lungs screaming for air. The forest seemed to shiver behind them, alive with the predator's fury. Finally, as dawn broke, pale light slicing through the dense canopy, they stumbled out of the forest. Marcus lay behind, lifeless. Emily and Sarah barely clung to consciousness, Jason dragging himself forward, bloodied and broken. The predator remained in the shadows, silent, patient, vanishing as the first sunbeams hit the trees. The forest fell silent. The hunt was over for now. Emily realized with a hollow, terrifying certainty that the predator had chosen to let them live, not out of mercy, but because fear, terror, and survival were far more delicious than death. And somewhere deep in the darkness, it waited, patient, inevitable, ready for the next prey foolish enough to enter its domain.